Always something, always something. Thank you for, yeah. So, where do we stand tonight? Well, Russia says it's withdrawing from Ukraine while they move artillery, armored vehicles, helicopters, and a mobile field hospital into attack position. Trump will be forced to testify about his taxes in New York, with more White House documents going to the January 6th commission. There's increasing confidence that inflation has either peaked or is preparing to spiral out of control and kill us all. Facebook is being sued for potentially hundreds of billions of dollars, and Mike Lindell. Honestly, I should be able to just stop there. Mike Lindell, a name I really wished I would never have to say again, tries to smuggle a truckload of pillows across the Canadian border to support the protests. This is overtime. Hello, and welcome to Overtime. Oh, we're still having sound issues. Give me a sec on this. There we go. All right. So hopefully everybody can hear me just fine. Yeah, Titan's pretty quick on the... Titan has the word muted hotkeyed onto his phone, so he just hits it, and I get it. And I think the speed with which he does it, I think 50% of the time he just hits it when the show starts because he knows I'm going to be muted. Oh, so welcome to Overtime. There is that meme that we dropped on the Discord. I love that. What did when the experienced YouTuber was asked by the inexperienced one said, well, gee, when do I learn how to stop muting myself before a stream? And the experienced one said, anyways, actually that works a little better in the full multimedia department. All right, so what do we have? We have a lot going on. Yeah, the Lindell thing is just crazy. Oh, dear Lord. Russian military buildup near the Ukrainian border is continuing. They have said that they are withdrawing and showed footage of them withdrawing, but it looks like that footage is actually from a withdrawal of a small number of units in Crimea, of all places, and is not what's happening right now. Roger, thank you. So they are, in fact, continuing to build up throughout the day. Earlier, we were just like, look, there's no evidence that they are withdrawing, and now there is considerable evidence that they are continuing to build up. So we now have Estonia, who apparently has intelligence in the region, which was new to me, but I guess it's considered credible. And they say that battle groups have been approaching ahead of what they consider to be a likely, at this point, attack on key terrain, despite Moscow continuing to say that they've been pulling back. Estonia has said that what they're expecting at this point is that, well, first of all, they're aware now of 10 battle groups that have moved forward to the Ukrainian border, where there is currently already 170,000 soldiers deployed. They say that Russia, they think, will probably not go after the major cities. They probably do not have the troops to hold it, but they do expect at this point at least a limited incursion into the west, probably to try to get the Donbas region to secede, or at least credible enough that they can say they have seceded. Oh, dear Lord. I'd instruct to ditch certain trolls in the live chat, but frankly, I think most of them like him better than me. I'm screwed. Speaking of, so I think the other thing we're gonna need to do is this dark interface. You know, it's overtime. It's like serious, but I think we're gonna need to lighten up the interface and get better. It's just too depressing for the intro music. So I have committed to we're gonna be lightening up this interface. We overhauled the entire interface. It's time for this one to at least get a little polish. So I've committed to it. So I think, probably, let's see, what is it? It's February 16th. So my guess is by maybe March 1st or 2nd, 2025, we will have that done, and I think it'll look great. So they're expecting a missile bombardment and occupation of key areas, which would include ostensibly roads and throughways, but to stay out of the cities because they probably don't have enough troops to sustain that, to actually hold the cities. But that is what the Estonian intelligence is saying. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said that, in fact, they have confirmed now troops and tanks have been moving forward, not backwards. Quote, what we see here is that they have increased the number of troops and more troops are on their way. So far, no de-escalation. Meanwhile, earlier today, there was a cyber attack. I actually think it started last night on the Ukraine Defense Ministry. They say their online networks and 2 banks were overwhelmed by a cyber attack. And as of today, the main government websites have been added. The attackers are still bombarding the Defense Ministry websites. The thinking here is that these bombardments are, in fact, ahead. It's sort of modern warfare nowadays, is right before you attack a country. And we did this in Iraq. You do cyber attacks on the infrastructure, see if you can get the power plants to shut down on their own before you bomb them. Any number of, techniques. So this is exactly what we'd expect to see before an attack. It looks like the general consensus is there's going to be at least a limited incursion at some point, or really very, very soon. And they are preparing, as we said earlier. It looks like artillery has been moved into position. And that's sort of one of the last things you do, as I understand it. Because you want to make sure everything up front is already guarding the artillery before you move it in. So it looks like if it's going to happen, who knows? It's Putin, right? But if it's going to happen, it looks like it's going to be extremely soon. So we'll be staying on that. We've also talked a lot about inflation, which is everybody's favorite topic, yesterday, and we're gonna I think talk about it more, but. Right now, the consumer price index is at about 7.5%. It's the highest it's ever been since February of 1982. But that number we've talked about, and it's an interesting number. But there's another index that's used, and we talked about this briefly, the producer price index. And the reason that one's a little more important is that one's less subject to political influence. Because the consumer price index is what you and I normally think about, and what affects us directly the most. That's the one that the government wants to keep down, if for no other reason than it keeps people from getting pissed at them. But really, the producer price index is more reliable for a number of reasons. It has had less influence from elected officials who are trying to just at least put a nice polish or a nice spin on the numbers. And it is also, actually, it's a bit of a leading indicator, because what happens is, what you see, the producer price index, that's what producers are actually paying. It's a reflection of the pressures on businesses in terms of what it is that they're having to pay for the products that they're buying. And as that goes up, they will pass it on to us, and the consumer price index will rise shortly thereafter. The producer price index is currently up to 9.7% for the last 12 months. So that is continuing to rise. That's a strong indication that the consumer price index will rise. They are not strictly linked, so there is a possibility. It's like sometimes the NASDAQ goes up and the Dow goes down, but it's a pretty good indication. Oil prices are part of this. They've been going up significantly. They've jumped over $90 a barrel, and if they go over $110 per barrel, it is estimated that the consumer price index will actually exceed 10%. And we're back to that first number there, the consumer price index. This would be a record for the index since the old calculations had been adjusted in 1981. Now, what happened there? Well, the index used to reflect reasonably accurately consumer inflation. And it had been averaging pretty high between the 1950s and early 1980s. So between the 50s and 80s, it was high. It was averaging about 10% a year and peaking at about 15% a year, which is a lot of inflation. Well, inflation is depressing news, and it's hard to get elected when inflation keeps going up. They corrected the value in ways that most economists think actually makes the number a lot less accurate, but had the upside, I suppose, of bringing it down from an average of about 10% for decades, with a peak of 15%, down to an average of about 3%, 3.5%, peaking at about 6%. So dramatic cut in inflation just by changing how it's calculated. Now, let's see. I want to... this calculation, too, by the way, the lower that number is, and we talked about this last night, it reduces what the government has to pay in cost of living increases. So the government a lot of what the government pays people has to be adjusted as the cost of living goes up. They have to pay you more. So the government expenditures is in some cases tied by legislation to the cost of living increase. The cost of living increase goes up as inflation goes up. So by keeping those numbers down, government spending stays down. But I think most of us know somebody who is on either a VA or getting some kind of benefits who found that the benefits are not keeping up with inflation. And the question is why? Well, it's because those figures don't appear to be accurate. We discussed how and why this also relates to the unemployment numbers. We won't get into that again today. Peter Schiff, the Austrian economist, who, by the way, I was thinking of playing a video from him, and you guys can let me know in the side chat if you're interested in seeing it. I really like this video. We'll talk about what it is, but he was one of the few people who successfully predicted exactly what would happen in the 2008 collapse, roughly when it would happen, and exactly why it would happen. He predicted it 2 years in advance. He's not the only one to do it, but he's one of a very small handful of people who did it. And every one of the people who predicted it actually predicted it a different way, and they were all correct. So it was interesting. At any rate, Peter Schiff, who has correctly predicted some pretty significant outcomes in the U.S. economy, has warned that he believes inflation is actually, if measured accurately, at closer to 15.1%, which, by the way, would also be a record even by the old measure. That would be that would beat at least 80 years of recording inflation. He says it can be more accurately measured by export prices, since these prices are set by the market and can't really be influenced or artificially inflated by the U.S. government. President Biden has come out and said that he anticipates that we're almost through the inflation problem. He says that there is going to be a spike in inflation, and we may actually be going through that spike. If we're not, we'll be probably going through it next month. After that spike, inflation is going to go down, and everything's going to be fine. Peter Schiff, however, has said that that's actually not true, and we are likely in for a dramatic increase in inflation, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does. And Reuters claimed yesterday that they believe that Peter Schiff is probably accurate, that because of the consumer price index, again, being a leading indicator and still going up, we can expect significant inflation to come in the near future. We can discuss what that means for those of you who really don't care and don't understand those numbers in time. But for overtime, at least, those are just sort of the facts, and we'll discuss what all that means for people at some other time. Or, again, I'll try to catch up some questions after the show, and we'll see what we can do about it. Vietnam has detected a new coronavirus variant, at least what they believe to be a new variant. It is a hybrid of the UK and India strain. Meanwhile, Denmark has declared, well, it's actually been declared for a short time now, the BA2 subvariant. It's a subvariant of Omicron, which they say is actually 1.5 times more transmissible than the original BA1 Omicron variant. So as transmissible as Omicron is, this thing is 1.5 times more transmissible. However, the initial evidence says it isn't more lethal. That's all we know, and even most of that is a guess. They're staying on top of that in Denmark. Meanwhile, the EU has said that they are implementing now new rules to reward countries that find new variants in a time of any crisis, and to try to create new procedures to be able to allow countries to more effectively lock down and still manage their economies and work together, and work not to stigmatify countries that discover new variants, but to, as I said, reward them. Meanwhile, let's see. Okay, well, and we'll stay on that. We're going to end up, I'm sure, with breaking news on Russia at some point. We'll see what happens with Omicron. The state of Texas is suing Facebook's parent company, Meta, over allegations that the media giant has illegally harvested facial recognition data from tens of millions of state residents. Now, Facebook has a photo tagging feature, which I think most of us have seen at some point. I was actually really impressed by, because it's really accurate, where once you tag a person in your photo, you say this is who it is, it actually goes through all your previous photos and actually tags them with that person. And I found it to be extremely accurate. You know, you put in a new photo and poof, you know, your children are tagged, your spouse is tagged, all your friends are tagged. Like, wow, this is really convenient. But they've been keeping that data, and it allows them to mine people's facial data who aren't even on Facebook because it doesn't check to see if they're a Facebook user before it checks the data. It doesn't ask you if these are Facebook users. These are your photos. So people who have not agreed to the privacy policy, tens of millions of them who are not Facebook users, yes, there are actually people who don't use Facebook, has had their facial recognition data recorded and stored without informed consent. Tens of millions of Texans who appeared on media uploads on Facebook have now had their facial geometry captured by the media giant. Now, Facebook has announced that largely as a result of this, and after settling a class action lawsuit from Illinois for $650 million over this exact issue, they've announced that they're not going to do this anymore, and that tool has now been halted. However, while they did say that they would delete the data collected from over 600 million users, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has said that there are two issues with this. First, Facebook has already violated Texas biometric laws passed in 2009. Yeah, I was surprised that we could have Texas and biometric in the same sentence in a positive way, but things happen. And they've already violated it, so even though they have agreed to change things, they've already broken the law and are thus liable. And also, the Attorney General has pointed out that while Facebook did suspend the program and did say that they would delete the data, they only said they would do that in regards to Facebook. Facebook, as you may recall, is now part of a larger corporation, Meta, and Meta has not agreed to delete this data and has not agreed to not use that data in Instagram, WhatsApp, or Facebook Reality Labs. Ergo, they may still, in fact, have it. So, Texas is suing for $25,000 in civil penalties, and here's the kicker, per violation. Now, that's not per person, that's per violation. And $10,000, that's an important zero, $10,000 per violation of the Texas Consumer Protection Law. What that means is, with the claim of tens of millions of Texans affected, penalties could go into the tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but go Texas. Meanwhile, every single Republican senator has refused to show up to work on the Banking and Housing Committee, thus enabling a failure. Enabling a failure. I think that could have been worded better, but thus creating a failure to establish quorum, meaning that there was not sufficient number of people to vote on anything. They did this in order to avoid having to consider President Biden's Federal Reserve nominees. No business could be conducted. And by the way, the Banking and Housing Committee, it turns out, are actually two important committees during a pandemic and an inflation crisis. You needed a news program to tell you that, apparently. So I'm going to get back into I really do think silence implies consent, and I know we had some disagreement on what that means, and I can read it from the original Latin and how it's applied. It doesn't imply consent and all. Let me say it's "que tacet consentiere videtur," which is he who is silent is taken to agree. And what that really means is, and the actual entire phrase is "que tacet consentiere vidute." Wow. Ubi, lobi, I can't even, I'm too tired to read it. But the actual phrase, the full phrase is, he who is silent when he ought to have spoken and was able to, is taken to agree. So this precludes, first of all, if you have a gun to your head, if there's going to be significant consequences for speaking. But it basically says, if you have an opportunity to speak up and voice an objection to something, and there's some pretty significant discussion on what that means, it's your obligation to do so. And if you come back later and say, well, I disagreed with the whole thing and was always against it, it's sort of like, well, you had an opportunity to speak, you didn't, so your consent is implied. And it's also pertains to consensus. Consensus can be presumed to exist until disagreement becomes evident, which is another way of saying this. So in other words, you can assume to have a consensus unless somebody objects and says, no, I disagree. Again, assuming that they're free to do so in all other circumstances. Now, the reason this is important is because in the Constitution, the Senate is required to give consent, but not required to have a hearing. So if they refuse to come into work when they otherwise can, they're not stuck with coronavirus. They're just not coming in. They were choosing not to. They are not objecting to the nominations. And so in my view, these nominations should go through. Now, I'm well aware that that is not traditionally how it's done, but considering it's also not traditional to delay a Supreme Court nomination until the next president, and that is a shocking precedent and violation of the norms, what's good for the goose. If you want to play those games, you can. The reality is there is precedent for the fact that if they don't bother showing up to work, hey, silence implies consent. So I'd like to see that go forward. At any rate, more tired than I thought. So a Washington, D.C. judge has reinstated the Trump Organization as a defendant in a lawsuit brought by the district attorney from D.C. that accuses former President Donald Trump of misusing funds for the 2017 inauguration. This is a reversal of an earlier decision that said that Trump and his organization could not be brought into this because there was not sufficient evidence to do so. It's now been determined that there is, so Trump is now, in fact, a defendant, as is the Trump Organization. D.C. Attorney General Carl A. Racine has filed a lawsuit. He filed it in January of 2020 and is accusing the Trump Organization, the Trump International Hotel in Washington, and Trump's 2017 Presidential Inaugural Committee, which, by the way, is a tax-exempt nonprofit, of using the tax-free funds improperly to enrich and pay the Trump Organization and members of the Trump family. This case is now headed to trial, and the former First Lady's close friend and Chief of Staff, Stephanie Winston Wilkoff, is expected to be the lead witness, and she has said that she anticipates being the lead witness, and for whatever reason has decided she's going to tell the public why on Thursday. So she said she's going to talk about what it is she has to say. It's a civil suit. It's not a criminal suit, so that changes a number of things. She did join the inaugural committee and helped plan events and has been accused, in fact, of misusing the funds herself. She published a tell-all book in 2020 that was not received well in the Trump administration, and she is saying that she will hold a press conference in order to discuss what it is she thinks she's going to contribute to. This is social media. We're going to try this. And not that I'm a fan of Trump, but at any rate, that aside, on Thursday, there's also going to be, they're going to be in court to address discovery motions and probably to set a trial date. Now, one of the reasons this is important, and I want to get into this really quickly, and I'm sure questions are stacking up, so I'll get to them in a little bit. Okay, we've discussed this before, and this is really important. Difference between depositions in civil cases and in criminal cases and testifying under oath. The Fifth Amendment does not apply in a civil case. The reason is it's not the federal government that's doing this. It's not, your Constitution against self-incrimination is by the U.S. government, not by the civil authorities. So in a civil case, you cannot invoke your right to plead the fifth, to remain silent. How does this work in practice? Well, let's talk about how it works in theory first. Nobody knows. It's different by the state. I believe it's Oregon, which says that actually, in keeping with the spirit of the Fifth Amendment, you can, in fact, in the state of Oregon, refuse to testify in a civil suit. But that, because it's a civil statute, Oregon can do that. Not every state has done that. Most states have some way of trying to deal with it. There is no actual right to avoid self-incrimination in a civil suit. And in this particular case, the state of New York can, in fact, compel Trump to testify, even if he will be incriminating himself. He cannot plead the fifth. If he does, he can be held in contempt of court and thrown in jail. That does happen. This famously came up with Bill Cosby, who refused to testify in a civil suit. He was going to be thrown in jail. It was a civil suit for sexual assault. The DA got together and said, tell you what, we will grant you immunity. And they didn't have to do this, but in general, judges, DAs, and law enforcement officials do try to resolve this problem. One of the other ways that they solve it usually is just have the criminal case first. Have the criminal case first, then the Fifth Amendment wouldn't apply anyway, because innocent or guilty, you can't be tried for the same crime twice. So then the Fifth is off the table for a civil case. When civil cases are done first, it makes things messy. It was Cosby, and I know this is probably an unpopular view, but it's the cornerstone of the legal system, the ability to make deals and the ability to enforce them, and the ability for defendants to believe them. The DA promised Cosby that nothing he said in a civil trial would be used against him in the criminal. This was a promise he made. It was in writing. Cosby admitted to a great many very terrible things, which launched an investigation, and he ended up being convicted. The conviction was overturned, and he was set free on the fact that the deal was, from the prosecutor who represents the state, that there would be no prosecution on anything he said in the civil case. Now, the prosecutor didn't have to say that, but if he hadn't said that, Cosby would have just taken the civil consequences of not testifying. The reason he ended up testifying was because there were going to be civil consequences if he didn't, and he was granted immunity. DA can't revoke it. So that's that. It's going to get messy, but it looks like Trump cannot plead the Fifth. So they're going to be asking him about his taxes, and we will see. Meanwhile, I do want to remind people of his previous deposition about his taxes, which I suspect will come up, because one of the problems here is that the Mazars USA LLP, who is the accounting firm that has handled his taxes, they informed the Trump Organization on February 9th that they should inform everybody who had been given the statement of financial condition and the taxes for the last 10 years that these documents, quote, should not be relied upon, i.e. don't trust them. That's a staggering thing for an accounting firm to tell a client, and to tell the client that they need to inform everybody else. You shouldn't rely on them. You should not use them. We're not saying they're inaccurate, they said. They literally said, we're not saying that they're not true. We're just saying you shouldn't rely on them. Okay. Nonetheless, why? Well, we know why. I'm not going to get too much into it unless anyone has a question and there's something we can elucidate on. But realistically speaking, there's now been a lot of charges that he inflates the numbers. But I would like to go back to what he said. So this just yesterday, he was asked about his net worth, and he reiterated that it's between $8 and $9 billion, based on the value of his brand and, quote, current enthusiasm and transactions which have or will take place. Will is not part of net worth, but truth be told, when you evaluate Mark Zuckerberg's net worth, you kind of have to use will anyway. So I do get the fact that, but if it hasn't taken place, it's not there. But I do want to focus on the current enthusiasm as how a good way to calculate his net worth, and his quote, his company's, quote, fantastic assets that are unique, extremely valuable, and in many cases far more valuable than what was listed in our financial statements. Trump was asked in his previous deposition on this issue, quote, now, Mr. Trump, have you always been completely truthful in your public statements about your net worth of properties? Trump replied, quote, I try. Yeah, that's not a yes or a no, which is worth noting. That's a no. That's a no. I try is a no. Just saying. I've been around the block. I try isn't. That's a no. If you can say yes, you say yes to that question. That's a no. All right. Have you ever not been truthful? This is Trump's answer. Quote, my net worth fluctuates and goes up and down with markets and with attitudes and with my feelings, even my own feelings, but I try. Turns out the lawyer had a follow-up to that one. Let me just understand that a bit. Let's talk about net worth for a second. You said your net worth goes up and down based on your own feelings? Reply, quote, yes, even my own feelings as to where the world is going, and that can change rapidly from day to day. Then you have September 11th, and you don't feel so good about yourself, and you don't feel so good about the world, and you don't feel so good about New York City. And then you have a year later, and the city is as hot as a pistol. Even months after that, it was a different feeling. So yeah, even my own feelings affect my value of yourself. Question. When you publicly state what you're worth, what do you base that number on? Response. I would say it's my general attitude at the time that the question is being asked. This is supposed to be the biggest business financier, and his net worth is based on feelings that fluctuate day to day, where the world is, of course, which is space. In case you wanted to know, I mean, it's outer space. I mean, I don't know what he means by that. I mean, if he's calculating his net worth based on like expansion of the universe, okay, we're moving on from that one because I will be down that rabbit hole for a while. But it fluctuates. It changes rapidly from day to day. That's the takeaway. So he's about to be deposed again. I am looking forward to this. I have to say, that's one I'm looking forward to. And last but not least, Canadian border guards turned back Mike Lindell, the founder of MyPillow and the man we had a very interesting breaking news on when he had a sheet of paper talking about how to overthrow the U.S. government that was picked up by reporters as he was leaving the White House. He had a truck carrying 10,000 pillows for protesters in Canada because he was concerned and wanted to be supportive of them. He was turned back by Canadian border guards. The reason? He didn't have a COVID vaccine. Oh, that's gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt. He's up there to help the protesters protesting the vaccine requirement, but he didn't have a vaccine. So I couldn't enter the country. Sorry, Canada's a country. I'm pretty sure it's a country. So, yeah. In a telephone interview, Lindell has said that a truck with the proper permit would be crossing again on Thursday. So, that's it. So that's all those. I think we got it. Oh no, we did miss one. But yeah, so it looks like now they're saying that the drought in the West, which has been going on for quite some time. Let me just see if I can bring this up a second. I may not be able to, and so I may push that for the U.S. The MegaDrought, which is the drought that and look, for those of you who haven't been, I mean, I knew California was in drought conditions, but then I lived in California. I was the president of an HOA there, and that was an interesting experience because we were required legally to stop people from washing their cars and doing stuff like this because water was so scarce. The only thing you could really spend water on, aside from people drinking it, was to water plants and vegetation in the area, which sounds silly, except that was the only thing that kept mudslides from happening. You had to water all of the in fact, we had to put up all sorts of vegetation in order to try to keep mudslides from coming in and wiping out communities. And because if the local trees and fauna and all that dies, it's a fire hazard. So it turns out you can't wash your car, but boy, we got to water the plants. So it's extraordinarily serious there. It's gotten very serious in Tahoe and a bunch of those areas. We've got some pictures. I did not load them in before the show. I think I'll probably hold off on them right now. But the houseboats floating in Lake Orville in Orville, California, and the lake is essentially gone. And there are roads. You can now just drive up to what's left in the lake, and there are miles of roads you used to not be able to have because there was a lake there. So the drought, which has been considered basically for the last 22 years, is the worst now, they're saying, since 800 AD, according to a new study which examines shifts in water availability and soil moisture. They go in, they get core samples of the soil, and they see, based on the strata, how bad droughts have been. This is the worst drought in roughly 1,200 years, according to scientists. They say that, quote, the drought shows no signs of letting up, with increasing temperatures causing the atmosphere to suck up even more moisture. It's, quote, a slow-moving train wreck. So, yeah, and, that's another one that we probably don't necessarily pay too much attention to, but it's hard to underestimate just how bad it is out there until you go out there. So, Anyways, that's it. And yeah, freak out. So drought, 1,000 years. Inflation may be a problem. It may not. Nobody knows. I don't think that's true. I think it's a pretty good idea. And I may play. So the Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff is an Austrian economist, which I have a very mixed feeling about Austrian economists. The Water Thief was a rebuttal to objectivist economists, and objectivism is just basically a branch of the Austrian school. It's not a branch of the Austrian school, but they all fall under the umbrella of neoliberal economics, which basically says the government should just stay the fuck out of business entirely. Well, there's actually better arguments for that, I think, than most people understand, but you can't do it because, so I'm a Keynesian, I believe in mixed economies, yada, yada, yada. Point being, nonetheless, Peter Schiff is actually a brilliant economist. He may be Austrian, but he's a brilliant economist. And there is a lot of footage, and I have a clip of about 9 minutes of him going on Fox News and saying, the housing market's about to crash, and it's going to be unbelievably serious. In fact, it's going to put the entire economy at jeopardy. And this was a year and a half before the housing collapse. And he started saying why, and he was laughed off of Fox News. One Fox News commentator said, "Would love to have you back to continue your expose on Santa Claus." That's what they said to this guy. And Ben Stein was there, a number of other reasonably well-known famous economists. Ben Stein said, Bear Stearns stock is rock solid. They're practically giving it away. It's like, yeah, wait a couple of weeks, they'll be giving it away. And they're like, you need to be buying more into all of these firms. Many of them got bankrupted not that long after those recommendations from every financial expert, not just on Fox News. It's just that Schiff was mainly going on Fox News. So that's why we got so much footage of it. And then they go to Schiff and he says, no, this is a house of cards. It's coming down. It's coming down real soon. He explained exactly why, and he was right. And said, buy gold if you want to get out of it. Buy gold. That's about all you can do. And he was one of the few who made a mint off of the collapse. Anyways, so we got all that footage. It's actually, to tell you the truth, if you remember exactly what happened there, it's almost like it's jaw dropping how right he got everything. It's like he was viewing a tape of what was going to happen. And the only other, just for people who are, there was an economist there who said, look, listen, people's wealth is higher than ever before. And Peter Schiff interrupted and said, no, it's not. Like, yeah, it is. Have you seen housing values? And he's like, yeah, that's not wealth. It's not. And it goes, of course it's wealth. He goes, no, it's not, because until you sell the house, you're at the whim of the market. If the market collapses, all that vanishes. That's on paper. It's not real money until you sell it. Now, that's Econ 101. That's one of the first things I learned in economics is what actually constitutes money and wealth. And he's right. This is really simple. And here was major economists laughing at him for talking about the basics of economics. So one of the reasons I at least like Austrian economists is they do tend to stick to the basics. So, all right. So I'm going to go through here. We've got our usual required solipsist jokes, and I've been speaking for a while, and it turns out I'm not muted. So that's a banner day. Jim is here. So thank you, Jim, for joining us. Really appreciate that. Always good to see you. Let's see. Yeah. And Mouty's here. Yay. As long as the GDP it doesn't hit the flux capacitor. Yeah, I know. So oil is going to skyrocket if things pop off. Yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to bring up, which is, so the problem is sanctions against Russia. They're going to be pretty punitive and they're going to be pretty serious. The problem is Russia knows they're coming, and Russia has dramatically overhauled their economy over the last few years to be much more self-reliant. They make many more products themselves. They are capable of producing a significant amount of oil and gas. And yeah, if they can't sell it, it hits their economy. But their economy has been deliberately insulated against sanctions. So the sanctions aren't going to be as productive as you'd like, especially in Putin's inner circle. Yeah, they like to do banking outside of Russia. They don't want to stick to just Russia. Nobody wants to just stick to just Russia, but they're capable of doing it, and they're capable of doing it reasonably. This is a no complimenting Nick zone. Excuse. When did that happen? I don't think you're allowed to declare that just by fiat. I'm just saying. I mean, we're gonna have to look at the founding documents here of In Time and figure out if the assistant head mod is actually to just declare things like that by fiat. But I'm pretty sure you really can't do that. Sound like a robot from time to time. Well, there's any number of reasons for that. Let me just quickly check. Oh, glad I figured that out right before ending the show. Yeah, well, the whole mic system needs to be adjusted a bit anyway. I now sit a lot closer, so like if I'm not paying attention to the camera, like you see me like this. So this is Nick, and we're having our show in time right now, and I hope everybody's doing well, but that's because that's where the microphone is. Just move this sucker up here. Everyone will be able to see it, but then I can't see the monitor. I almost can't see the monitor anyway, so I don't know that it matters. Yeah. So let's see. What else have we got here? Biden's trying to keep people calm. I think that's true. You need to be careful with that kind of thing, though, because it's like you lie to the people long enough, and it's like the Federal Reserve is saying they're going to need to bump up interest rates to try to combat this. The thinking is that they're going to bump up interest rates 8 times this year, and it's going to be aggressive. And that's there are issues with that. Austrian economics, an Austrian economist would say that's part of the problem, and there's a decent argument to be made for that. Having said that, if it weren't for the Federal Reserve, we wouldn't have survived 2008. So, it's yeah. Don't use Facebook, native atheist. Yeah, wise. I rarely use it, but I really did like that feature. And little naive old me, I'm sitting there going like, oh, this is really cool. No, they're not an evil corporation that's just going to keep the data. Oops. Problem is biometric tracking work wonders in the area, but it can be, yeah, I think Jim's got a really good point there. Dr. Jim, sorry. Dr. Jim, I think, has a real good point there. He's Dr. Majors to all of you, but I got his phone number, so I get to call him Dr. Jim. I mean, look, I think there shouldn't be too much of a problem with collecting biometric data under certain circumstances. And truth be told, it seems to me that when you get booked, they already take your fingerprint, which is biometric data. They take your picture. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't scan your face. And I'm not sure why that would be, I'm not entirely comfortable with it, admittedly, but I'm not sure on what grounds you could object to that legally if all the rest is permissible. But yeah, Facebook, the biggie there, and I think that's an interesting catch, which is you already signed the Facebook agreement with for how they're going to use your data, and you don't read it because you can't, and I think there's going to be issues with that. Hopefully that the law will deal with, but all that notwithstanding, if you upload pictures that contain other people, the problem is they haven't, and so that's what Facebook has been collecting, and I think they're in the wrong. I'm curious. My suspicion is that Texas is basically suing for the statutory limit, but it's per incident. So we're talking possibly hundreds of billions of dollars, depending on how they choose to classify these things. Is Facebook going to have to pay that? I would think unlikely, and I'm assuming that this is a bargaining chip and they're not serious going through with it, but I think they probably could go through with it if they're serious, and I'm very curious to know what would happen. It sounds to me like it's enough to bankrupt the company. Whether or not a judge would actually do that, I don't know. But if there's a judge anywhere that would be willing to bankrupt Facebook and not think twice about it, he's in Texas. So we'll see. Audio is loud and you are clipping. I'll have to work on that. All right. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, something's screwed up on my mic settings, so we'll have to figure out what it is. Yeah, a rule of thumb: if the My Pillow guy's on your side, you're on the. Yeah. I think Titan's got that one. Let's see. Biden's decision to greenlight the German. Yeah. That well, and I think that pipeline, that pipeline's going to be a problem. The Russians really want that pipeline, and it's handing them more power that I don't think we should be handing them. But. Yeah, well, I could switch the people are still. Oh, okay, so I think we're and 23andMe sends your data to the FBI. Oh, great, that's nice to know. I'm not sure I even know who they are, but sending your data to the FBI is not a warm, fuzzy kind of sentiment in my view. All right, well, actually, I think that just about covers it. So, let's see. There's actually, well, and Mr. Frost is here, and we're actually going to be that conversation that he and I had. I guess I've been invited back tomorrow to discuss a whole bunch of things, including it wasn't philosophy of science. What the hell was it? I don't know, but we'll be talking about that in the Discord. Come join the Discord. We can figure out just how much we should be really calm and happy about everything, or run around with our hair on fire. Apparently, there isn't a spectrum. It's one or the other. So whichever you choose, come join us on the Discord, and we will. Oh, I do want to check one other thing here, just while I got this. Oh no, we're good. We're good. Okay, that's unusual that I get to say we're good, but I think we're good. So. Yeah, there you go. Like I said, we're gonna revamp this interface, and so it's kind of accruing difficulties over line. And I'm not sitting there fixing them because we've really just sort of overhauled the in-time interface. I'm just going to copy that over, change the graphics, all the stuff that you have no interest in knowing, and probably rightly so. So join us on the Discord. We will. I think we're shooting for doing an After Dark. Normally we do these on Thursdays. But tomorrow, it looks like I'm going to be maybe on the what is it, Church of Entropy. So we'll see what happens. I don't know, but we'd like to do one. I know there's a lot of things people want to talk about. So Xander and I will figure out when's a good time. And that's in the Bible. Dear Lord. Get your faith back while there's still time. Save your soul. The problem with Pat is he's got some idea of what my history is, so he's just like, it's like, oh, he's paying attention. Okay. So, all right. Yeah. All right. Well, good. Well, so look forward to seeing you guys on the Discord. I'll be in chatting. I probably won't be on VC, but I'll drop in and say hi to people. And I don't know. I know Xander was in there with I think Porpoise for a little while last night, so that's good. Thank you all for joining us. If you've gotten this far, I gotta believe that means that you liked what you're seeing. So please hit that subscribe button. Please hit the like. It really does help us. That's why we ask. There isn't like a secret cabal of people saying, you know what we need to do. We need to annoy our audience by constantly pestering them to hit the like and subscribe button. That's what we need to do. We also need to speak in fake quasi-Greek or some sort of other accent just to confuse people. We're not doing that. We're asking because it really does. It does help. And the patrons have been a huge help. So thank you all for that. Thank you all for joining. And we look forward to seeing you on After Dark whenever it is. And that notwithstanding, Tuesday we will have Homozygote on with a special guest philosopher to discuss philosophy of science. So that is Tuesday's show. Thank you all for joining us.